prioritize their needs and demands? Where is it that we are failing to strengthen the resilience? Because when we look at the disaster profile of these areas, not much seems to have been done in practice that has made an impactful difference. Can you identify the causes and give us some of these solutions?
I think looking at the last part of your observation, I totally agree. I think there's not much of input that has been received from the local communities about the whole gamut. As my distinguished colleagues and you yourself said, the temperatures are going up, and the climate change impact and environmental degradation because of various factors that we discussed in northern areas and other mountain regions is probably the maximum. If you look at the other parts of our country, they may not have suffered as much. I'm not saying they have not suffered, but not as much as what the mountain communities are suffering. You take a name of a disaster because of heat or higher temperatures. We have the glacial lake outburst, we have landslides, we have avalanches. We are all aware of Athabad Lake, which was a huge landslide. We are aware of the Gyari landslide incident in which over 150 soldiers died. Then the roads that are made are on treacherous mountain slopes. They cause a lot of accidents. And so that's yet another risk. Unfortunately, when we were in National Disaster Management Authority, we started a process of doing a multi-hazard vulnerability and risk assessment of some of the vulnerable districts in Pakistan. That exercise has not been completed as yet. Now, the National Disaster Risk Management Fund has started with a national catastrophe model, which will have, the risk module, the vulnerability modules, the cost estimation module, just in case something happens, what will be the extent of damage. Unfortunately, these are all initiatives that there's nothing wrong with these initiatives. They're right, but the involvement of the communities, I think, is not to the extent that it should have been there. Now, having said that, once you know the risk profile, only then you can develop the responses. So when you look at the responses, you have poor infrastructure, so you're heavily dependent on, heliborne evacuation ability, which is very, very minimal. Can we lift all the people? The answer is no. Some of the critical people can be lifted, otherwise not. Look at the rescue 112. Pata region, they called me something district.
Merged districts.
Merged districts. So we have provided a lot of money for that. But giving money is one part. The second part is to bring the staff, the equipment, and then but will the provincial government keep on providing their share of the money every year so that the teams are always well trained and the equipment is always ready? It's like dicey. I'm not 200% sure that it will be done. So that's the second thing that I think we need to look at. So multi-hazard vulnerability risk assessment, national catastrophe model, which will have the vulnerability assessments and risk assessments, and third, strengthening the rescue 1122 service. Now, fourth thing, I think, which is very important, and we have been harping on it in National Disaster Management Authority as well as in NDR, is to mainstream three things. One, risk reduction. Second, climate change impacts. And third, environmental safeguards into your development activities. Whenever a project is submitted to the planning division or planning commission or the entity which approves the projects, there are guidelines, and you have to check box everything when it comes to environmental safeguard. These things have been taken care of. What are the climate change impacts? These things have been taken care of, right? And likewise, the third area that I mentioned, disaster risk reduction. So unless we mainstream these three things into our development, you will continue to go back. You will continue to lose economically. And of course, there will be economic losses, but there will be human losses as well. So I think there's a strong reason for the governments that we take it seriously. We do some lip service in some of the government departments, but I think that stops it there. Nobody is really serious. Nobody is trained. If you go to the planning commission and ask them, what are the climate change impacts that you perceive on a certain project, they will look to you and ask you, what are you really saying, right? If you go and ask them what is the DRR checklist, and these have been finalized in consultation with the relevant ministries, in consultation with the planning commission, it exists. Ask the planner, have you ever looked at any project from these angles? And they would give you a blind look, right? Maybe environmental safeguard, you have EIAs and IEs, which they are a little particular about, but rest of the thing, I don't think they're sort of doing it religiously. So that is, I think, one area that needs to be done. Likewise, now I think it's time that we look at the buildings, especially public sector buildings, which are vulnerable. There are, you'll be surprised, there are hundreds of schools which are made on the fault line. If you recall the earthquake of 2005, we lost 73,000 people, right? You know how many of them were children who were in the school? 26,000. Out of 73,000 people, 26,000 school children and teachers died in the school buildings because those school buildings were made on the fault line. In Azad Kashmir and in KP, we have done that exercise, that we have replaced all those schools which were lying on the fault lines to a great extent, or we have retrofitted them. But does the fault line only exist in Kashmir and KP? Now, within the NDRMF, we have a substantial chunk of money going in to retrofit the public sector building. We are currently giving priority to the schools, but we need to look at who's the first or the second responder in a disaster. It's either the local communities or the local health facilities. We have not strengthened the health facilities. They may be on the fault lines, they may be in the flood zones, they may be in the landslide zones. So I think slowly and gradually a plan must come up where we could either shift some of these facilities which are you. For example, I can tell you, in the earthquake of 2005, none of the hospitals of Azad Kashmir was functional because they were all destroyed. And everyone had to be flown into Islamabad, Abbottabad, Khariyan, Lahore, and all the places. And it has, multiple other issues. The mother went to CMH Khariyan and the father went to CMH Lahore and the son went to CMH Pindi. And getting those families united was a huge problem. So isn't it better that we look at our health facilities and educational facilities and make sure that they are resilient to disaster and they keep functioning even when a disaster strikes? So those are some of the areas that come to my mind, because these communities will continue to suffer because of the climate change. And if we do not have one, of course, we need to identify and take certain measures to make sure that the impact is less. But at the same time, we need to look at the existing infrastructure, which is a response infrastructure, and make necessary amendments right now. If we have to strengthen them, we have to change the road alignments to make them more safe. Because if you are taking a convoy of 6 ambulances and there's a landslide, what these guys are going to die within the ambulance. They are not going to reach the hospitals. So I think we need to take such measures to make sure that we make these communities more resilient.
Good point.
And of course, lastly, which we are doing to a great extent, is to introduce the system of community-based disaster risk management. And in that, again, NDRMF is funding a lot of communities, where not only we are training the communities, but we are also providing them the necessary emergency equipment, so that if something happens, they can use that equipment for urgent rescue services.
Thank you for that intervention. You've made a lot of good points, but I think I'll pick up from the last point that you made about resilient infrastructure, and I'll carry that question forward to you, Mr. Ahmed Kamal. Communities in mountain areas seem to prefer gray infrastructure over green infrastructure. Like General Nadeem, I'm also a practitioner, and I see that mountain communities get affected by disasters, not because of a flood, but because of the flow and increase in the velocity of the river when it passes by closer to their lands. So there is erosion, and they cannot wait for green infrastructure that takes much longer to regenerate. So we're talking a lot these days about nature-based solutions, and I want to get your feedback on this. Do you think we will be able to get buy-in
patterns, and then it is going to revamp or increase the biodiversity of that area. So similar sort of a practice is required for that particular, where the area we are talking about. But the difficulty in that area is that it is not big rivers, there are not big streams and all that. There is a very diversified, difficult terrain there, and at the same time the people have to move long distance for sake of their day-to-day life and everything. So why don't, when they are already doing these things, why don't they are trained for those nature-based solutions which they can themselves put in. I still remember CERT, community emergency relief team, response teams. So some sort of similar structure can be, in communities can be developed, and those can be given this awareness, and then it can be started maybe at a very small level, and then it can be upscaled both, laterally, and then a pilot can be, can be taken on for the other places as well. I think that is can be done. With regard to the gray structures, yes, there is a certain places where this is required. You know why? Because when a certain flash sort of rain comes, it takes so much along with that, the mud houses and all that. Either we should, support those mud houses with some strong or gray structures, or otherwise we should continue with those wire gauge structures where there is a cascade of, you can say, the cascade is provided on ground so that when the heavy water is coming, its impact is reduced once it passes from one cascade, one step to the other step. So both the combination of both would be needed, and I think that some good practice have already been made. Sir, I remember that under NDMRF, probably 2 years ago or last year, some 500 or 500 million, 550 million investment has been made in this sector, where good gray structures have been put on places, not everywhere, but where there is a dire need of that, where there is in the downstream area, much more communities are there, where in case of non-existence of such gray structures, their day-to-day activities are going to, hampered and all that. So a combination of both would work there. And again, for that very purpose, a very strong, very elaborate multi-hazard vulnerability and risk assessment exercise would be needed, for which already a guidelines and principles have been prepared, have been made within National Disaster Management Authority, and they should be, practiced or put in place all along the country rather than at a single place. And for that, the very first step is nothing should be, we should go for nothing, but we should announce that we are going to undertake national level multi-hazard vulnerability and risk assessment. That will be followed by these, gray solutions or nature-based solutions and all that.
Thank you, thank you. So we do need a mixture of both the gray and green, depending on the need of the people and the emergency situation that they are facing. Dr. Hular Marsood, I'll come back to you because you've come back from EC mode, and that's the hub of research for the Himalaya, Karakoram, Hindu Kush mountain systems. So what is it in the last 3 years that you have learned there, some of the lessons that you think that we can use over here, where you think that they are doing things better or in a different way, and we can apply them over here?
Thank you very much. This regional organization, which is focusing on mountains of high Asia, you can say China is also included, and it works through 6 programs, including atmosphere, biosphere, climate resilience solutions, livelihoods, and ecosystems. Then it is backed with the program Mountain Environment Regional Information System, which is mainly making use of geospatial information technology. And the 6th one is knowledge management. And in knowledge management, all the research work and the technical reports, they are compiled and they are shared. Pakistan is one member out of the 8 members. Very important part of programs here which Pakistan is possessing. So that is being addressed through these 6 programs. And we learned a lot because I went from National Weather Service, and this was in fact the continuity of my services in climate sector, which I undertook at EC mode. And EC mode is running through pilots. A successful pilot
we are expecting that the host government will be replicating this pilot in that area. So in this way, the situation will be win-win situation. But unfortunately, what I have learned that that pilot is completed, and after that, the host governments are not interested in. So that's why we are not getting that much fruit which was expecting from these pilots. And at present in Pakistan, there are some projects with which EC mode is integrating. For example, EC mode introduced in Pakistan zigzag technology for bricklaying, and that was a great step. And Punjab has taken it very seriously, and even this has come in legislation also, legislation of the province. And there are many other issues also related to environment, which we were tackling in EC mode. For example, one atmosphere, two Punjabs. So we were trying to bring Pakistan and India together to solve this smog issue. But India is showing cold shoulder and not taking a lot of interest as Pakistan is interested. But unfortunately, this problem persists, and Pakistan is working hard on reducing the emissions from sources, from industry, from transport, and from agriculture residue burning also. So these were some of the experiences which we have brought from EC mode to Pakistan. And in Glacier Lake outburst flood second phase project GLOF 2, which is commonly known. With that project, we are trying to help Pakistan. We were trying to help Pakistan, but Pakistan has some own problems. So therefore, they are not taking EC mode on board. Otherwise, EC mode has long experience of GLOF early warning systems and GLOF stabilization, nature-based solutions, surface slips which are happening in northern areas of Pakistan mountainous system. So you were talking about the tourism, mountain tourism. This is really very much emphasized by present government also, but we should be very careful while promoting mountain tourism, especially in glaciated areas. I have observed some glaciers in China, which they have opened for tourism. For example, glacier number 12 near Xinjiang province. So the glacier number 12, glacier number 9, glacier number 3. So they are open for tourism. And there are so many recreational activities, but they have managed it very well. They have not let the environment to be degraded. Litter is immediately managed. It is taken away. Next day you visit that glacier, you will find it very clear, and you can do sports, you can do whatever is available. But Pakistan should also learn that lesson from China, and we can promote mountain tourism, but not at the cost of environment. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Dr. Ghulam Rasool. I think one of the lessons that I read from your experience in ISI mode is that when scientists get together under the umbrella of ISI mode, they collaborate with each other. But when it comes to country level, those applications are not addressed because of the dysfunctional relations or the mistrust between countries in South Asia, which is unfortunate. I'll come back to you for the concluding round of statements. And picking up from what Dr. Ghulam Rasool has said about tourism, the need to promote tourism, responsible tourism, Jan Nadeem, and that is the theme for the International Mountain Day today. I would also like to have your comments on what were your observations, because you've served as Commander FCNA in one of the most glaciated areas, and you flew over the entire area. So as they say, every nook and cranny of that place. So, I mean, what would you say is missing? Is it management plans? Is it institutional capacity? Is it lack of awareness among local people? And what is it that we can do to open the areas for tourism and yet protect the environment? Thank you.
As they say, it's all of the above. I think, as all of you know, we have 3 national parks: Yosai, Karakoram, and the Punjab. We have management plan of 1, and I think we don't have the management plans for the other 2. I think only the Karakoram National Park has a management plan. The Punjab and the Yosai do not have. I remember visiting Deosai when I was posted there as Commander of CNA, and I used to fly myself. So like Aisha was saying, I have been to every nook and corner. And by the way, most of the nooks and corners that I did not know, she told me that this is the Karambar Lake and this is this. So we used to fly over to those areas, and I think went all over the northern area. So I think these management plans need to be finalized first and foremost. And then once these are finalized, how are these to be implemented? I think that's the place we are sorely lacking at the moment. Now imagine a tourist which goes to Nepal pays something like $75,000 to climb a peak. In Pakistan, that fee is only just 6,000. So are we looking at the number of tourists visiting an area, or are we looking at the money that is being earned by the local community? And how much of that fee is being spent for the development of that area? So we need to look at this and get the right balance. I'm not saying just go to 75,000 in a jiffy and that's it. Within Pakistan, if you look at, for example, biodiversity, there are now areas where this trophy hunting thing has been introduced and is being implemented, and implemented to the core. And you now go into that areas, especially if you go to Khunjarab, and you will see herds of ibex, right? I remember when I used to, when I was there in 2003, and only we had the bear, what was this called? Brown bear in Deosai. And they used to be visible. Now Deosai, and there are very few people on Deosai. Now they've made a road, they have made restaurants over there, they were planning to have a polo tournament over there. If you disrespect the environment, you will face what is Deosai facing now. Every Tom and Dick and Harry will get a jeep hired because there's a road there. They'll just go. It is, like my heart sort of kind of sinks when I look at that Deosai. That's a pristine beauty, and it has been totally now rotten with litters and irresponsible tourism. So again, as I said, tourism, it's very good. Let people come. There's nothing wrong with it. And as Dr. Ghulam Rasool was also saying, we have to regulate it. In certain areas, we can take this much of load. Otherwise, we are going to overload the atmospherics with carbon emissions and with wood cutting and with everything. So that is one area that we need to look at very closely. Get all your management plans, get them implemented on ground, have controlled tourism, increase the fee, spend that fee on the improvement of the communities and in the infrastructure, make good infrastructure. You can find, multiple types of hotels totally full, and especially the tourists, which are local tourists, are totally irresponsible. So that is one area. Second, I think one of the recommendations that I wish to make is that, especially in Gilgit-Baltistan, there has to be political inclusion. We have left them on the lurch for far too long. Like the newly merged districts in Pata, which are now getting a say into the national mainstream politics. Why not Gilgit-Baltistan? It's your strategic area. It's your strategic link with China. There is so much lying over there, and they don't, and sometimes back when I was there, I think even their ID card did not identify them as Pakistani. They used to be written Gilgit-Baltistan. So this political inclusion, once they get some assembly seats in the National Assembly, they will have a voice. They will be able to voice their concerns and get the development fund or other initiatives for their area. And you will see a sea change in Gilgit-Baltistan, because that's such a beautiful area and it can be developed to a much higher standard than what it is. Third thing that I wish to highlight is, of course, we talked about mainstreaming the environmental, the risk reduction, and the climate change impact into all your development. That's, I think, very, very critically important, because at least from now on, all the development that takes place has to be risk resilient. Tourism, I have already spoken. Lastly, I don't know, we have talked about it, about the resilience of the mountain communities. But what we have seen is that within the mountain communities, those communities where their hands were held, they were taught they are doing far better. And I talked about Hunza. In other cases, they're not doing as well. So I think there is a requirement for more education. And I can tell you that I'm not talking about Hunza, I'm talking about other areas. The yearning for education is there. If you educate, I think you are taking care of a lot of the issues, and let it be part of the syllabus, this sense of responsibility of owning their environment, of respecting the ecology, respecting their environment. If that's made part of the curriculum, why not? They will start learning from day one. So I think these are some of the things that I thought I'll just put across the August gathering here. And if there's any policy maker here, probably they can push it out to the people concerned who can take these decisions.
Thank you, Jal Nadeem. I couldn't agree more with you. I was in Gilgit-Baltistan in August this year, and I went up to Deosai after a long, long time. And what I saw was that all the flowers had disappeared because of the emissions.
There used to be 156 species of flowers.
3,000, I think, different, yes, different species. So they've all disappeared. The marmots that used to keep popping up, along the roadside have all disappeared. The Shosar Lake over there that we visited
there in the shop.
Yes, are degraded. So we have an issue that, wherever we take tourism, we end up by degrading that environment instead of actually adding on. And for the short term, the local people are happy, because in Skardu, for example, 20 years ago, when I first started working there were just 1 or 2 hotels, the PTDC and maybe 1 other hotel. Today, there are 500 hotels over there. Every place has become a hotel, and there's no waste management. There is no, treatment plants. So what you see is enormous degradation, within the short span of 4 or 5 years we have seen, and it will now accelerate because we've increased the number of flights that are going there. So these are the issues that, we need to handle at the institutional level.
If I may
Yes,
add
please.
one more thing, and you will bear me out. The hydel potential in these mountain areas is tremendous. And most of the people are still cutting wood for heating purposes. And I know Aisha made some of the hydel stations in Schwaz, right? Doesn't cost much. And you can provide electricity to a local community. it's not linked up with the national grid. But I think that is one thing which needs to be encouraged so that people have clean energy available to them for all their needs. That will also cut down on your deforestation alone. So,
I think quite right. We need to take a holistic view, and even when we talk about ecosystem restoration, we can't only talk about planting trees. We have to think of micro hydro stations. We have to think of flood protection walls. We have to think of irrigation schemes. We need to think of revitalizing waterways for the rangelands, and that is how ecosystems are actually protected. Coming to you, Mr. Ahmed Kamal, I think we have discussed a lot about global warming, its changes on the hydrology, and the imbalances that result in disasters. Now, a lot of the water that we talk about that flows into our rivers is transboundary. Do we have enough systems of telemetry and early warning systems in place to be able to have a better response time? Or is that also something that is affected by the regional lack of communication between upper and lower riparian countries?
Thank you very much. I think that there has been so many parallel activities going on. The very first effort we need to make is to integrate them. Different ministries, different departments, everyone coming up with 3 or 4 stations, 5 telemetry stations, and things like that. So all these are required to be, implemented under a single umbrella. Number one. Number two, yes, I have already stated that there is a very good now, well thought of estimation made of putting in place small telemetry stations and small early warning system on ground, provided that concept and that project gets some attention at the highest level. Again, such things are very difficult for us to convince when we go to the highest offices and all that. Priority wise, they are at the bottom. So I would say only one thing, that community to community based early warning system connecting with each other, one, and then connecting them with the mainstream at the larger at the national level. Under National Flood Protection Plan 4, there is a proposal of placing regional flood forecasting centers, each in Karachi, Quetta, GB, Muzaffarabad. We have already made some progress on that. So why don't such regional centers are placed there? Because they are going to have the forecasting done for that particular region. And then that will also be connected or networked with the central system at Islamabad, with NDMA, with PMD, and with flood forecasting division in Lahore. Similarly, that 934 telemetric stations on all small rivers, which ultimately have their flow coming into the Indus River, are going to benefit a lot with regard to the availability of precise accounting of water and then its distribution at large. So I think that is the area which we have not even considered, which probably could have been considered at the first step. So that I should say. Thank you.
Thank you. A last question to you, Dr. Ghulam Rasool. You elaborated, in the beginning about the importance of the cryosphere and about how global warming is affecting that, and also acknowledging that we occupy a vast cryospheric space in the HKHK mountain systems. So one part of it is global warming. The other part of it is black carbon. Now, how much role does black carbon play on the melting of glaciers, and how important is it for us to take a regional approach to address this issue?
Thank you very much. This is a very important issue. But unfortunately, if you look at the black carbon deposits over the glaciers of Pakistan, those are not mostly indigenous. They are transboundary in nature. Over the last 2 decades, India shifted its steel industry towards foothills of Himalayas. And now that industry is emitting a gentle breeze from east to west, that brings the whole emissions towards Pakistan. Because that breeze is gentle in nature, therefore, that immediately spread it over the terminus of the glacier, low elevation, because the carbon dioxide molecule is heavy in nature. Therefore, due to gravity, it subsides immediately when wind speed slows down. So that is an issue, and there was one study in 2014 or 15 on 5 glaciers, and that was presented, that appeared in AR5 also. That mentioned that 15% of the total black carbon comes from the indigenous, cooking, heating of houses due to wood burning. But 85% black carbon is coming from east. So that was really an alarming fact, which has to be taken care of. And that should be pleaded, I think, between the countries. ECMOD took a very important initiative looking at this 1 atmosphere, 2 Punjabs, and that black carbon issue. Thanks to them, although India is dominating there, but China was very supportive to Pakistan, and this issue was highlighted. And ECMOD took initiative that there should be some integrated effort. Ministerial summit held in 2020, and that ministerial declaration was signed by 8 member countries. Now, the progress on that part is quite slow. I think there should be some energy behind that, and Pakistan should take lead, taking China on board as it did previously. So then I think the situation, that integrated approach is just on the line of Arctic Circle. There is Arctic Council, and that Arctic Council is taking all the member countries of Arctic Circle on board. And you see now gas exploration or oil exploration from Arctic Ocean, that is systemized. Similar council ECMOD has suggested in this area also. I am hopeful that some conducive results will come up. Another point where I would like to emphasize is gender inclusion. If we look at our northern areas, most of the men who are young, and they are leaving that area in the search of livelihood, and women, children, and elders are left behind. So women are taking care of elders, care of children, and in case of disasters, they are the most vulnerable. This community-based early warning system or disaster risk management approach, this should be implemented, I think, in letter and spirit, not just a vocabulary, but it is required for northern areas because women is most vulnerable. ECMOD has taken a very good step in integrating the women in different groups. For example, Upper Indus Basin Network. So there is a very dynamic women group. Most of the women are coming from Hunza area. They are very educated women, but playing very important role in understanding the problems, solving the problems, and involved in nature-based solutions. And the third point, which is worrying me very much, is urbanization. Urbanization in all over the country we have seen, but in northern areas, that urbanization is also of the same scale as we are witnessing in Gujranwala, Faistabad, Rawalpindi. So that urbanization issue should also be taken care of. Otherwise, uh, the things, environmental issues will be out of our control.
Thank you,
Thank
Dr.
you.
Ghulam Rasool. I think you've made a very good point because the population of Skardu that used to be 1 million has increased to 3 million over a span of just 4-5 years. So that, rural to urban migration is going to be a major issue. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, we come to the end of this conversation today, and I want to thank our three eminent panelists. I think from what I can gather from their conversation, they have shared their perspectives in depth with you. But what we need is a more robust connection between science, society, and policy, and that seems to be missing because the voices of the community, the institutional capacity, and the scientific perspective are all there, but we're not bringing them together to come up with solutions that are realistic and achievable for our mountain communities. With that, I would like to thank all the three panelists, and I call them distinguished not because of their knowledge alone, but because all three genuinely care about mountains and mountain communities, and I really thank and appreciate that. So with that, I open the floor now for questions and answers. Please introduce yourself, and if you want a particular speaker to answer your question, identify him, and keep your questions brief and focused to the topic under discussion today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, ma'am and sirs, for the very brilliant explanations. I have a question with myself that we can hear the names of several institutions working on a regional level for political cooperation, for social cooperations and other kind of cooperations. But on the regional level, I think there is not any independent body which is working for climate saving, especially for mountains protection. So don't you think it's the time for an independent mountain saving or mountains protection body to come into existence to make all the governments of regional level responsible to save their mountains in their areas? Because if there is deforestation in one area, that's affecting the other one. In Afghanistan, if there are trees cutting down, the floods will come to Pakistan. The same way, if something is happening in Pakistan, it will affect the India and China. So don't you think that kind of regional body should come into existence, which is independent, which is not only giving the advices, but making the governments responsible to work strictly in this area? That was my question. Thank you.
Jan Nadeem, would you like to respond to that?
If I've understood the question correctly, I think what you're talking of is the fact that climate is not related to geographical boundaries, and they are trans-boundary issues. And things happening in India, like we talked about black carbon, we talked about the impact of water from Afghanistan, we talked about the smog, which is partly responsible for the air quality index in Pakistan, especially the Punjab region, Lahore. So these are transboundary issues. Now, there is a forum in the shape of SARC, which used to, and they have, a dedicated kind of a group which looks at the transboundary or call it interregional cooperation on such issues. Strictly speaking, I think when we look at the climate change impact or the environmental impact, they should be looked at the regional level. But because of the political issues within the SARC countries, this regional integration is not happening. And I think it is caught up because of our political differences. I can tell you that during the earthquake of 2005, our helicopters, which were picking up the injured people, they were flying into, at times, Indian territory. and they were never fired upon. So in certain catastrophes, probably there will be some regional cooperation, but in the peacetime, like, slow onset of issues, climate change impact does not really happen overnight. It's not like an earthquake. In that cases, as of today, and if you have heard the Prime Minister's, I think, giving a talk somewhere, and he mentioned that with the current Indian government, there is no possibility of a talk. So such issues of transboundary nature will take a very, very low priority. I don't see it happening in the near future. But I totally agree with you that it must happen because it is transboundary.
Thank you very much. Umair from CCRD. My question to sir. Sir, basically, whatever we have been listening here, we have been briefly telling everyone, in fact, telling everyone is discussing the landslides, when there will be a landslide, when there will be a GLOF. So why don't we just go in predicting them? There are techniques that are available. You're discussing about the GLOF cavities below that is end glacial lakes or development of those different types of lake. Why don't we just go there? We just monitor them and predict them before that particular disaster just occurs. Is there any baseline study that has been carried out if you are talking about the landslides or if you're talking about the GLOF events? On that particular baseline, we are like predicting something. If a flood is coming, why we are not able to predict it before? If a GLOF is coming, why don't we use some science in that particular scene so that we can predict that before it just destroys each and everything? Thank you.
Thank you very much. GLOF and landslide, these are fast onset phenomena. And their prediction is very, very difficult. GLOF especially. And landslide occurs sometimes when there are cracks due to past earthquakes. And a slow rhythm rainfall, that rain will penetrate through that crevice, and then landslide can occur. And there is another feature of northern areas, that is permafrost thawing. So that permafrost is not visible. It is ice buried under the surfaces. And if there are two surfaces sandwiched with ice, and ice is melting, then this surface will slide over. So such predictions are not easy. Not in Pakistan only. All over the world, this is a great challenge. But for GLOF, early warning, Pakistan is struggling first identifying most dangerous lakes, following global criteria, and then establishing early warning system over there, which is giving the risk of GLOF, which is predicting risk of GLOF, 65% risk, 70% risk of under any particular situation.
Jalaluddin, would you like to add something to it?
Dr. Ghulam was saying, there are predictions which are taking place at the moment. Let's talk of floods. Most of the floods start from the north, and we have these telemetry stations. So most of the communities which are living in the lower riparian areas like Sindh or lower Punjab, they were informed, or they are informed well in time about the impending flood disaster. It's a different thing that most of the communities are very reluctant to move out of those areas because of their homes and their cattle and everything. Second, if you recall the Atabad Lake crisis, the fissure was visible for quite some time. And let me also update you on all those communities were removed They were taken out and placed somewhere else. That is why we had only 21 casualties. Otherwise, we would have a complete village lost. So in many cases, the predictions have been made to the good fortune of the people who were saved. But of course, there are certain things like an earthquake, you can't make a prediction which will give you enough time to relocate the population. So it's a balanced mix. But I totally agree with Dr. Ghulam Sool. Once we have this even GLOF 1 or GLOF 2?
Draft two.
GLOF 2, once these radar stations are in place, then probably we would be able, because they will be able to look at the pace of the glacial melt. And if there is huge, what is it called? A huge chunk cuts away from the main glacier, it can be monitored. Its speed can be monitored, though it may be in centimeters per year or per 2 years, but it can be monitored and you can make out that it will ultimately break away. And therefore, there should be no development in the way of that, in the possible way of that glacier.
So
So these
we'll,
predictions are being done to an extent, but I think a lot more needs to be done.
we'll take one more question because after that we have to wrap up the session. Please.
Thank you. First of all, thank you very much for this very interesting panel discussion. And Christina, the Italian Agency for Development Cooperation, the field of disaster management since 25 years already, applied to cultural heritage protection. So it's a little bit different, but it's the same kind of approach. I heard about the early system, warning system that you have in place.
Speak louder, please. Yes.
Okay, I think if I again got your question correctly, we discussed about the multi-hazard vulnerability risk assessments, and these maps are available to all the developers, and these must be known to the local mountain communities, which are the no-go areas where there can be no development will take place. Where are the areas where you have to undertake certain additional safeguards to make sure that in case a disaster comes, then at least your buildings are resistant to it. In city areas, we have a system of called microzonation. So within cities, there are areas which will be problematic. So you can develop parks over there, but you do not make social sector buildings in those areas. So these are the legislations and these are the tools which are available in many cases. In many cases, these are not available. And again, I think it will depend upon the capacity of the government to make sure that before passing the designs of a building, the necessary clearance has to be taken in while looking at the risk map. And we have Kamal here, in fact, who can just give us in one-liner what the national catastrophic model is being made at the NDRMF and what are the modules that are being developed, including the risk module and the vulnerability module. And this will be available to everyone in Pakistan once it's completed. We are doing it with the help of Suparco. And that will allow us to have safer construction, where to build, where not to build. Kamal, just can you?
Thank you very much. I think we'll now invite you to have a cup of tea and continue this discussion on the rooftop where you have a view of the Margala Hills and you can enjoy the beauty of the mountains over a cup of tea, and you can engage in more question answer sessions over there.